we've got here is a failure to communicate.
Welcome back to another episode of Epsilon Reporting on Air.
Well, it's a new day and new oversimplification and generalization of nuanced interpersonal topics. Today I wanted to talk about something I call emotional fat. It's basically just like emotional baggage, except the reason I call it, I changed the name, at least for myself, is so it kind of represents how it's dealt with. So emotional fat is basically very complex things that have happened to us, and those traumatic incidences, it doesn't always have to be traumatic. At the end of the day, it just has to lack any sense of direct meaning or causality. So basically, I think that the human brain fixates on things that don't fully make sense. Like it needs to build a comprehensive world that and coherent world that it can accurately predict what's going to happen next. That just like came in as a evolutionary role, and I think that it bleeds into our daily lives with kind of what things that are less relevant to our present lives, yet we hold on to. And once again, as I was saying, I think it stems from not being able to attribute a meaning or being able to accept what has happened, which usually the process of acceptance stems from identifying like what went into it, what caused it, how it can be prevented in the future, and kind of just attributing any kind of lessons to it. That's at least how it works for me. So using another concept that I have dubbed cognitive tilt shift, basically this is just like a dramatic shift in perspective. I think there's a lot of ways to achieve cognitive tilt shift. The slowest route is just meditative introspection, kind of like examining your life, examining the patterns. Dog's barking. All right, dogs have been dealt with. Basically, now what the hell was I talking about? Oh yes, so introspection is the slowest route to achieve cognitive tilt shift. I think one of the faster routes is through therapy and quite literally getting a change in perspective. And then there's a few other routes that could involve illicit substances that I will get into at a later point. Anyway, with learning and reading up about philosophy and just thinking more critically about my life and the world around me, that is, I guess that could be linked to introspection. So that has led to a lot of cognitive tilt shift for me personally, and has essentially served as emotional enzymes to help attribute some sort of a lesson, some sort of a meaning to traumatic events that have happened to me personally. And if I can, even if it sucks, and if I had some kind of control over space-time, I would prevent these things from happening to myself or my loved ones. If I can kind of match up these elements, well, first break up these huge emotional and traumatic events, if I can break them down into their constituents, I need to use that word more often. Anyway, if I can break them down, then they're more easily identifiable for all the variables going in and out of all of these elements. And so if I can break them down, then I need to match each one of them to some sort of a lesson, some sort of a meaning, kind of identify like a purpose and also a way to prevent it from happening in the future. Another thing that plays a role into emotional fat is regret. By all means, there's a decent amount of regret. It depends on how cyclical your thinking is, how obsessive you are. Smaller things can be deemed as regrettable if you do not have a control over your thoughts and the redundancy of those thoughts. However, I do think that there are certain regrets that are definitely genuine, justifiable, and the key is to identify which regrets can be easily reconciled and which regrets are harder to. For instance, I'll give you a personal example. I can regret bringing my phone on a road trip. That sucks. I mean, I lose out on some music. If I realize it soon enough, I can turn around, go back, get my phone, or otherwise I'll relinquish the music control over to someone else for a change. But an example of regret that's harder to kind of bounce back from or reconcile, and that one comes to a kind of colder realization that you have to accept it and move on. An example that I could foresee in my life is that ever since I was a small child, my father has talked about wanting to go on kind of like a backpacking trip throughout the European theater, kind of going through the route of the Allies that the Allies took, pushing back the Nazi occupation of Europe. And if I keep trying to convince him to do it, and keep trying to make sure that we both build the motivation to take care of this, because if anything were to happen and I was not able to accomplish that with my father, one thing that I've wanted to do since I was very young and that I've known that he has wanted to do, I would definitely be it would add some weight to my heart. I'm in a little bit of a rush today, so I'm going to try to wrap this up on a few last minute points. Side note, I'm curious how long something has to be considered a podcast. I think I'm going on 8 minutes or so right now before editing. So yeah, I don't know. Let's push the bounds together. Anyway, I guess the final things that I kind of want to cover are the whole kind of underlining tone concept of this one is to focus on identifying, knowing yourself and identifying the things that you have a problem with, fundamentally have a problem with. So this can also bleed into anxieties, just kind of, I'm not a huge believer in feng shui or qi for that matter, but basically I think that there is something to think about in the application or the possible reasons behind feng shui other than the correct flow of qi. And basically I feel like the human brain seeks to organize its environment, and that can be thoughts. And if you haven't mastered the ability to organize your thoughts via compartmentalization and kind of timing, understanding the bounds of that cyclical thinking to prevent yourself from being a more obsessive individual, but it can also apply to the physical realm. So how you organize your environment, I believe, is kind of a reflection of your internal mental state. I think that there can be a degree of chaos, and I'm a little biased here because I have a ton of junk. I'm working on getting rid of my junk, but if someone were to ask me where something is, I'd be able to find it immediately. And then there's kind of sections where my stuff goes or belongs. And this applies to knick-knacky stuff or little things like fireworks or other examples of small objects. But also larger things, just kind of back to the feng shui thing, the flow of the room. So kind of where the chairs are organized, kind of a correct use and budgeting of the space that you have available to you. So that's another example of kind of just identifying the things that could cause you anxiety. I know there's certain people that wouldn't be bothered at all by that, but for the vast majority of people, I'd argue that there is a sense of calm if you have a personalized approach to spatial organization. This can also bleed into self-care, just identifying what kind of snacks you have. For instance, I buy the Costco size boxes of canned mandarin oranges and keep that in my car, because after a long hike or a long day of work or what have you, dude, mandarin oranges are my comfort food. So as I was saying, at the end of the day, to avoid excess anxieties, or at the end of your life to avoid a heavy heart, just really know yourself, know what you can get over, know kind of the bounds of your spirit. And Also, side note about the whole emotional fat thing and not being able to easily move past things that can't be reconciled, meaning can't be attached to it. On a lighter note, I feel like it would make for a good marketing technique. Like making just commercials that, by all means, there are commercials that don't make sense, but I think it's for more of a comedic value. I think it'd be cool if there were commercials or ads that would establish some direction or some story and then completely abandon it. I think that cognitive dissonance, the lack of resolution, would stick in someone's brain. They would continue to think about it after the fact. I know this episode, what if I got real pretentious and called it acts? So act 3 was a little all over the place, but that's because I'm a little time crunched and I have freaking dogs barking in the background. So if anyone wants to buy me a sound booth, slip on into them DMs. Otherwise, thanks for listening. This is Epsilon reporting, and good night and good luck.